To another episode of Mostly Peaceful Latinas. I'm your host, Bella.
And I'm Linda.
And we have a very special guest with us in the building once again, the legendary, the iconic Mr. Roger Stone. Thanks for being here with us, Roger, again.
Ladies, I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear what I have to say.
And we can't wait to hear what you have to say. The
Same.
last time Roger was in the studio was what, sometime last year?
Yeah, sounds
yes,
about right.
sometime last year.
Actually, it was right before, was it? Was it
elections?
after the Ron DeSantis? Was it? No, we met after Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was after. It was after.
Yes, it was when he was leading in the polls and he was certain to be nominated.
Yeah.
That period.
Well, you guys know Roger Stone, a friend of Mostly Peaceful Latinas, and obviously a lot is going on in the political world with the election here. So we have a few questions that...
And an expert at everything.
Yeah.
There's somebody that knows what's going on. It's
Well,
Roger.
as you know, I'm a veteran of 13 national presidential campaigns.
Yeah.
I started counting. I stopped. I've done 700 different campaigns
Wow.
in the last 45 years. I stopped counting at 700.
What a wealth of
lot.
knowledge.
That's a
We
lot.
could only hope to take on all this knowledge from
I
Roger Stone,
was-
which is why we invite him
yeah.
every chance we get.
I was talking to somebody on the beach at the Cava Bar, and they mentioned your name, and I said, "Have you watched the documentary on Netflix?" And they're like, "We didn't even know there was." I'm like, "Watch it, because it's one of the best
It's
ones
like a
that you'll
game
see."
changer.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
Even the producer, Nelson, told him that you were coming in. He's like, wait a minute, Roger Stone is coming in today?
I'm very close to the mostly peaceful Latinos
Absolutely.
people. So happy to be here.
Roger, let's talk. Last time we were here, we talked about DeSantis. I think that's actually a great place for us to start,
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Look, this has got to be one of the great political miscalculations of all time. I mean,
Yes.
this
I would
guy
say
this guy was
miscalculation is right.
measuring the curtains in the Oval Office, and he never had a compelling message. In other words, if you wanted the MAGA candidate, we already had the MAGA candidate. That was Donald Trump.
Right.
Once it was clear that Trump was running again, there was no space. There was no vacuum for Ron. He had one foot in the Rhino establishment camp. He had the other foot in the MAGA camp.
Yeah.
And evidently started believing his own bullshit and started to think that he could actually beat Donald Trump. I was opposed to Trump's endorsing him in 2018. I thought he was a duplicitous, treacherous weasel with no personality back then.
You already knew this in 2018?
Wow.
I did. I was, and it wasn't that I was for Adam Putnam. He was,
Right.
he was
Awful,
not my
right.
cup of tea, shall we say. But I realized that Ron would never be loyal. It would only be a matter of time. And then it became clear to me before the 2022 election that he was definitely running.
Yeah.
And when I told the president that, he said, "Oh no, come on, not a chance. I mean, this guy owes me everything. I made him." I said, "Yes, I know that, but
When
he's-
you warned them at Mar-a-Lago, that famous video,
Yeah.
that Bella likes to play that video
Oh,
often.
I play it all the time.
yeah." So
She
I
likes
tried.
to
I
play
tried.
that
to
video.
tell
Roger
him.
Stone being an icon and a legend here. He is a year prior to.
And these guys, let's be very clear. They burned through $300 million
dollars.
without ever having a compelling message. They just, I think, and to this day, I still think that Ron and Casey, they blame the consultants. The problem wasn't Ron's lack of appeal or lack of talent. It wasn't that Casey essentially just annoyed people because she was so incredibly self-absorbed. It's the consultants' fault. Nobody was going to beat Donald Trump for this nomination.
Yeah,
He has remade the party at the grassroots to be the party of working people, to be the not the party of the country clubs and the bushes anymore, but the party of middle class America, the party of America first. I don't think that's ever going to change, even when he rides off into the sunset. The party has changed forever.
It's forever changed. Roger, you bring up a point. I'm really heavily involved in activism here in the state of Florida, as you know, and election integrity is something that's like a constant on our mind. And I feel like there's this idea that was perpetuated after the 2022 elections, where Florida has become the gold standard for election integrity. And
Yeah, that's nonsensical.
I want to hear your take. Like, are you concerned about what could potentially come out of Florida with the 2024 elections?
I very definitely am. First of all, just looking at the landscape, you have the legalization of recreational marijuana on the ballot as a constitutional amendment. You also have abortion on the ballot because the governor pushed through this 6-week ban that is unrealistic, to say the least. And I'm pro-life, but that is unrealistic.
Right.
So that has given the left the opportunity to collect enough signatures, which is a difficult process to get on the ballot for a constitutional amendment in Florida, and put them on the ballot. This is going to bring out more younger voters and more pro-democratic voters. I think that's the point. Now you go to the question of, not only are we not the gold standard, but we have some tyrannical boards of election supervisors who are manipulating these votes. And the governor signed election reform legislation passed by the Republicans that make the system more opaque, that make it harder for you to get information, make it harder for the average person to see the actual election results. And if you ask the same question of a board member twice, they can charge you with harassment, no matter how polite you may be.
Right.
Now add to that the fact that to challenge an election result, you have to be a member of the Board of Elections. The average citizen doesn't even have the right to challenge an election based on perceived anomalies or irregularities. So the system here is dirty. The voting lists are particularly dirty.
Yeah.
In '62, the folks over at the Florida Republican Assembly, very good people, they developed a program which basically scans the entire voter file, which in Florida would be 15 million people, and they came up with 1 million bad addresses, 1 million.
Holy crap.
Then they divide
That's
them
a
by
lot.
county, they sort them by county, and they've gone to all 67 counties. 62 counties have agreed to remove them. You can guess the counties that are refusing to remove them.
Broward.
Dade,
Dade.
Miami-Dade,
Palm Beach. No.
Palm Beach, I think also Orange, which would be Orlando,
Right.
and Tampa. So I mean, it's not surprising at all. We have a very dirty system here. It's gotten better, but DeSantis has made the situation much worse. Yes, Florida is in play. I think the president will win it,
Yeah.
but Florida is very definitely in play. It would be a mistake for us to think that Florida is a red state. Florida is not a red state. Florida is still a purple state. DeSantis's big win was an anomaly. The hurricane, I think, contributed greatly to
And
this.
the COVID stuff too. It was kind of like fresh after that. And then you had the weakest candidate from the Democrat side, which was Charlie Christ.
Well, the point is, Charlie's a great politician, but he was counting on free media coverage in the closing days of that race.
Yeah.
Plus, he was able to see how unsympathetic and unlikable Ron DeSantis was. But the hurricane basically
Pushed that over.
He was gone.
Yeah.
You couldn't find him anyplace, and he had no opportunities. I've watched that debate twice. I call it a draw, if you want to know the truth. And Charlie went in with the weakest possible hand you could have.
Yeah.
How do you go from being Mr. Ronald Reagan Republican, Mr. Pro-Life, Mr. Protect Your Guns, to being Barack Obama's favorite congressman who thinks abortion should be on demand and we're going to come get your gun?
Yeah.
Overnight. That's just not even a logical jump. So Charlie, who's a very skilled and likable politician, does a complete backflip on his ideology. And he still went into that debate with a very weak hand. I loved it when he attacked DeSantis for closing the beaches.
Oh, yeah.
It was very,
Which is true.
It was kind of
I
iconic.
mean, we
Very
lived in
true. I mean,
Miami
what's
Beach
up?
and we saw it ourselves. Like, DeSantis didn't step into 2021.
We had a
Kids who were-
school board
we had
revolution here in
school board
Miami-Dade
revolution
because
because
Ron
of that.
DeSantis failed to act in
Yeah.
the timely manner that he should have,
look,
while at the same time, pumping his chest that he was doing things that he wasn't really doing.
Well, as you know, he tried to rewrite his entire COVID-19
Yeah.
record after the fact.
Yeah.
He tried to create a false narrative that he had been an opponent, that he'd been a critic, when in fact his position was fairly identical to Donald Trump, except for Trump wanted to open sooner than he did. And Trump went out and very actively promoted ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which the people in his own administration were going out of their minds in the health departments. But he was right about all that, of course.
Yeah, of
So
course.
that he was never able to make that the wedge issue that he wanted to make it.
Do you think, I know you've got a lot of exposure in the state. Do you see the Florida GOP doing anything to secure,
Well, what happened to Chris Ziegler?
we know what happened with Ziegler,
who
but
right now? I think it's a better question. Who right now is in charge of the Florida GOP? What are they doing? What's going on? Because last year this year, right? Was it last year or this year? There was a scandal with Chris Ziegler. I don't think he's the head of the GOP anymore.
No.
And I feel like there's no leadership.
Well, I mean, look, I was never counting on them for much, to be very
Right.
honest with you.
Okay.
There's more action and there's more activity and more activism going on in the Florida Republican Assembly.
I guess
that's where the workers are, or in the Trump clubs, as you know. So if you go to any given large county, we won't name names, and you go to a Republican event, an REC event, you might have 600 people. You go to the Trump club event, like Trump 47 in Palm Beach, there'll be 2,000 people. And there'll be energy, and they will be across the socioeconomic strata. They're not all one type of person. They're not all country club Republicans. So I was never counting on them for much, to be honest with you. Donald Trump, the Republican National Committee, now under new leadership, working with the Trump campaign, has got to come to grips with the election integrity issues. First thing they need to do, the first thing is to clean the voter lists in all these swing states. Clean the voter lists. Go to court if you have to do it. No, we're not trying to disenfranchise anybody. No, we're not trying to knock anybody who's a real voter who's entitled to vote off the voting rolls. But we have to recognize that in Florida, if you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and you register to vote, nobody's asking you for proof of citizenship.
No, there's also no real process to document deaths that take place in the state either. So somebody could have passed away, 5 years ago, and they've got people sitting on the rolls that are 120 something years old.
No, actually, there is a way. Deaths have to be registered with the state, so you could dupe drop the list of people who died against the voter list. It's not that you could. It's not that they can't. It's just that they don't.
It's just that they don't have the process.
They don't.
So it's like we've got people sitting on this roller rolls that are breaking records for being alive. We know that they're not alive.
Correct.
They're there.
Right. And the funny thing is that they sometimes even vote. That's the
even crazier part. Is the part where they even vote.
Can
Roger,
we go back
tell
to
us a little bit about
abortion stuff?
Well, I want to know. I want to ask. The abortion thing is definitely. We've gotten a lot of heat for our stance on it, right? And I mean, we thought it was a pretty common sense stance, which is we've been fighting for the better half of the last 4 or 5 decades, making the argument to overturn Roe v. Wade by saying that this is not a federal issue. This is a state issue. And it seems like Republicans don't know how to leave good enough alone. They don't know how to win. Right. They don't know how to win. And as opposed to kind of relishing in this moment that we've fought, so generations have fought so hard for, now we're getting all of this talk about, well, we want a federal ban.
Yeah. Let me address the thing in a more broad sense. Because I'm a libertarian Republican for many, many years, I thought I was pro-choice. Because I didn't like the idea of the government telling the woman what you can do. When I was redeemed in the blood of the cross, when I returned to the church, when I got my grounding and confessed my sins, and when I decided that I was going to be a good boy, and my great-grandson was born, that moment for me was it. And I began to realize, that abortion was the taking of a human life. And I changed my views. And I was very clear about it. I'd been one of the founders of Republicans for Choice back in the day. But this was, in the 90s. So I consider myself to be strongly pro-life. But I also realized politically that the exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother make sense to me. That was Reagan's position. I think that's where most people are. Then I always believed that the Roe v. Wade decision was wrong. If you go watch the movie Roe v. Wade, I'm in there playing a Washington Post reporter.
Oh, yeah?
And act like a real asshole. So I really nailed the role, because
I didn't know about that.
My good friend Nick Loeb made the movie.
Okay.
He asked me if I would do a cameo, so I play a really sleazy Washington Post reporter.
Nice.
You got to check it out.
Okay.
Roe v. Wade. It's a great movie. It's actually historically completely accurate story of how they politicized a court decision to get the legalization of abortion. In any event, we have correctly argued, as you point out, that this should be a state, not a federal function. There is no fundamental constitutional right to abortion in the U.S. Constitution. I know that upsets some people, but happens to be true. So the states have the right to regulate. We win this victory, it goes back to the states. And let's face it, New York is going to be different than Mississippi. It's just,
in many ways. It's not just the abortion issue.
But it'll be decided by the people. And the people, either through their elected representatives or by voting in referendums or for constitutional amendments.
Just the way the republic was set up to work.
Exactly. Democracy that the left always talks about. That seems to me where the people are. I think that's where we wanted to be. Then people like Lindsey Graham are coming along saying, no, we need to have a federal ban. Well, a federal ban, first of all, it will be politically unviable. It's also the exact opposite of what we've been preaching as a party, at least, since the 80s. So it makes no sense. I think Trump has this exactly right. Since the Democrats cannot run on any part of their record, we have a disastrous economy. We have record gasoline prices. Notice they're going up again. They're going to go higher. We have rampant inflation. We have a fentanyl crisis. We have a crime crisis. We have a fiscal crisis because local county and city governments have to pay for social services for this giant wave of illegals who are coming into the country. We're on this close to war in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Our State Department has scuttled all the peace talks, so we could have ended that war twice. There were very hopeful potential settlements, and the U.S. State Department kills them. Now we have this war in the Middle East, which seems to be really a war for show. So you're like, call the guys you're going to bomb, or you call the Turks or whoever it was to tell them, listen, we're going to bomb you at noon tomorrow. Get everybody out of the building and get good video of it, okay? I mean, the whole thing turns out to be a kabuki theater thing. So the Iranians attack Israel, but they don't really kill anybody. Israel says, well, we're gonna respond the way we want. Biden says to Israel, no, you can't. You have to be restrained. You can't counterattack. The whole thing is crazy, and here's why: we're on both sides of the war. We're financing Iran. We have unfrozen 106, I think it's $126 billion in assets, and we did this based on their promise. Oh, don't worry, we're going to use the money for humanitarian reasons. When we know they're going to use the money to restart their nuclear weapons development program and to finance these attacks on Israel and to finance Hamas and Hezbollah. Trump really had Iran backed into a corner because of the embargoes on their oil, because of the sanctions. They were broke. They had no money. They had plenty of oil, but they couldn't sell it anyplace. Right. They had no liquidity. They had no ability to fund terrorism. They had no ability to build a bomb. As soon as Biden gives them the money back, they go right back to their master plan, which is the destruction of Israel and then the destruction of the United States.
Roger, checking out your page, you recently retweeted a post by Brian Cates, and where he says, some people think that I'm crazy when I say that the CIA and Mossad created Al-Qaeda and ISIS and used them to foment terror in the Middle East, and the Western powers that were forced to respond to their military actions. We're watching Israel have anything short of a PR crisis right now.
Restate your question. I'm not
It's
sure.
not much of a question as much as where I'm going to right now. What are your thoughts on the war that we have in the Middle East right now and the messaging?
There would be no war if we weren't financing the Iranians, if we weren't financing those who are attacking Israel. So there is the problem. Israel has enough strength to act as a deterrent, and nobody would be attacking them if they didn't have the money to attack them. So
what about the PR war? Because this is something that Trump said, and it's something that I pretty much believe in.
I think for the first time in my lifetime, Israel seems to be losing the PR war.
Right.
I would agree with that. So there's a focus on the alleged savagery and brutality of Israel's tactics, but there doesn't seem to be a corresponding focus on the savagery and brutality on the part of Hamas and Hezbollah. So it seems very disproportionate.
It seems like a lot of Americans just want to take a stance where they're like, hey, we're anti-funding wars that we're not a part of, we're anti-genocide, and we just rather or not have an opinion or have both opinions, where it's like, can we stand with Israel and at the same time not condone what's happening? And it seems like that option of staying standing in the middle, mutual.
I think that's kind of the position that Tucker Carlson has evolved to. Look, we have serious problems here. Why are we shipping $280 billion to Ukraine?
Yeah.
Why are we funding both sides of a potential conflict that could really
I think it's
conflagrate
more
into World War III at any moment?
Yeah, I think, with the whole PR war situation is that whether people want to admit it or not, Israel is given a preference with the media and with both parties. Right? You know what I mean? Kind of like not supporting Israel somehow evolves into you hate Jews, you hate, whatever.
But this is a fairly new phenomenon, in all honesty.
Yeah.
So previously, I would say that the viewpoint of the media was more pro-Israel, and people who were trying to make the case for Palestine were viewed as outliers or viewed as radicals.
Yeah,
now it seems to have flipped around. I mean, when you saw the juxtaposition, which I really loved, of Donald Trump attending the wake of a New York City police officer who was gunned down by a guy who had 21 priors, but they don't hold the guy. He kills a police officer. Trump goes to the wake. Then across town, you see Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Bill Clinton on stage at the Radio
With
City
Lizzo,
Music Hall
right.
with Lizzo, who's not even remotely entertaining, and there are huge protests outside. Huge protests. Let's be clear; those are not our people protesting.
Right.
No.
Those are not conservatives
Right.
protesting. They're certainly not Republicans.
Well, yesterday they
They're-
were
they're
blocking
Democrats.
Biscayne Bay.
Those are
Those
Democrats.
are all.
Absolutely.
Those
Those
are
are
all
Democrats.
Antifa. Those are all left-wing liberals.
It's
you
the
know,
same
it's
people.
the
It
same
actually is
people.
pretty much the
Right,
same people.
right.
Do you think
They
you
switch
know
out the banners, but
Right,
they're the
right,
same
right.
people.
we look so much at this? How much of this do you think is theater for
Which part?
leading up to the elections of the conflict in the Middle East? How much of it do you think could be resolved with Donald Trump being elected? How fast can he get this resolved?
I don't think it's just theater, although it is starting to look like it. Biden is trying to manage it because he knows he's got a problem. He overwhelmingly won Muslim Americans in states like Minnesota and Michigan, and right now they're not on board.
No, they're not.
On the other hand, he also, as most Democrats, he's traditionally won big in the American Jewish community, which is habitually and traditionally a very democratic.
Right.
So,
80%.
so he's got a problem kind of going both ways. I think most Americans.
Michael Rappaport recently spoke about it and
saw
gave his
that.
testimony and
Saw
said
that.
that it's gonna have,
He
he's gonna
said
have to hold his
voting
nose
for Donald
because he
Trump is on the
cannot vote for
table.
somebody that's not.
He
yeah,
said
it's
voting
on
for
the
Donald
table.
Trump is on the table.
I saw that. On the other hand, since I never heard of Michael Rappaport, I wasn't that impressed. But anyway, the point
Some
is,
guy, he did a movie or two back in the 80s.
so the point here is that this is a political problem for Biden. I think most Americans recognize that in both of these situations, in the Ukraine-Russia situation and in the Middle East, if Trump were in the White House, you would not have had either one of these problems.
Or the war in
It is. I mean, the war in Ukraine is much simpler, and we talked about this previously. But let's go through it one more time. We signed two agreements: the Budapest Memorandum under George H.W. Bush, and later the Minsk Accords. We agreed, absolutely agreed in writing, not to push Ukraine into NATO. That's not about the membership in a club. That's about whether or not we're going to have Western-funded missiles pointed at Russia on the ground in Ukraine. That's what it's about. And Putin has made it very clear that that was a red line for him. In violation of those treaties, we are now funding a proxy war. It's a war that military experts who are much smarter than me on these matters tell me the Ukrainians are losing, or at a minimum they're at a face-off. They're at a Mexican standoff. And Trump would never have pushed Ukraine into NATO, and therefore you'd have no conflict here. And he could have negotiated a settlement. Biden blurted out in the beginning he was willing to give Putin the Donbass. So don't say that it's Trump who's in Putin's pocket. He said that publicly. So this could have been solved diplomatically. There's no interest in solving it diplomatically, none, on the part of this administration. The bottom line of it is, I think, very clear, is that Trump's unpredictability and his strength kept the bad guys at bay. Putin would never have gone into Ukraine. Xi would not think twice about going into Taiwan. And we wouldn't be financing the Iranians, and they wouldn't have the money to cause all this mayhem. So the world would be a safer place today if Donald Trump were still president. Trump is the peace candidate. Joe Biden is the candidate of war. Remember in the debates when he said, this guy, Trump, he gets cornered. I think he's going to start a war with Iran. Well, the guy who started a war with Iran is Joe Biden.
How fast do you think this could be solved once Donald Trump gets elected? Do you think that it's already gotten too complicated for there to be an easy solution? Or
No, actually, I don't. I really don't think it's that complicated. I just think it takes the will and the strength. I think Trump could negotiate an agreement in both cases. The problem here now is you've already given the money to the Iranians. Right. So you've already empowered them. You can't take the money back. You could put the sanctions back on. They will ultimately run out of money, but you had them where you needed them. They were isolated in the international community. Even the Chinese were not buying their oil. Now everybody's buying their oil. We have made them very wealthy and very powerful. Tough to turn that around in a short period of time.
Well, and also there's breaks, right? It seems like the other side of the world is uniting against us.
Well, because they recognize the instability of the American dollar.
We're weak right now.
Based on the massive spending. We have a printing press money. I mean, every time they give billions more to Ukraine, I think to myself, well, where in the budget did this come from? Which line item do they subtract this from? It turns out the answer is none. They just print it and hand it over. So the massive spending is caused our inflation. It's also the debt is causing the instability of the dollar, and this can be seen around the world.
Do you think that this idea of World War III is more like fear porn than anything else, or do you think that that it is
there
a
a
viable possibility
before
that,
the election?
I think there's a more than a reasonable probability before the election. I'm praying that that's wrong. I don't think it's just fear porn. I think their policies are so dangerous, are so ill-conceived. They could easily stumble us into a war. I have no doubt about that. And whether you could use that war as an excuse to postpone the election under the War Powers Act.
That's what I fear. That's
I've
literally
gone through the war. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been through the War Powers Act several times. I don't see the authority to do that. But on the other hand, as I learned the hard way, the law, the Constitution, the rules, the facts, the evidence, these things never matter. Never matter when Democrats are in control.
Yeah, we were speaking earlier. Trump was in New York. I think he's in New York right now, dealing with the Stormy Daniels case. And then he has a few other cases going around. The other one, the civil case in New York. There's the Georgia. There's one here, right? And then one in D.C.
What are your kind of looking at those cases? Is there any of those cases that you're worried
Concerned
concerned for Trump? Or do you think that all of this is going to, it's just paper mache that they're holding up right now, House of Cards, just waiting to
Well, the question is, when can they get to trial? It all has to do with they go to trial. If Trump went to trial in D.C., he will lose that trial. I mean, it's a stacked deck. He can't get a fair jury. He certainly doesn't have a fair judge. I've seen this up close. But I don't, and I'm not a lawyer, so it's very important. I don't think that the Supreme Court they're going to give us this kind of mixed ruling on immunity. They're going to say, yes, former presidents do have immunity, but in this case, Trump's actions were outside the perimeter of his authority and responsibility as president, therefore he can be prosecuted. I'm just guessing. Politically, I think that's where they may come out. On the other hand, the fact that they even heard the case, I think, is encouraging, because I didn't. They could have just declined to hear it.
You could have just not taken it, just like they did with the election winner.
Which is what I thought they were going to do. So they heard both cases. They heard the election case, but the election case also. I know our people were celebrating, but you have to be a little careful. What the court said was, the individual states cannot bar Trump from the ballot, but the Congress can. And that's why having a 2-seat majority in the House is really scary. The instant that 2 seats became vacated for whatever reason, the instant Hakeem Jeffries became Speaker, they will immediately pass Jamie Raskin's legislation to bar Trump from the ballot. They would take it over to the Senate, where it would pass 51-49, and now we are SOL.
This is a really real probability. Are you concerned that we're going to lose more of our majority prior to
well, the guy from Wyoming,
the next couple of
right?
He's already out.
He's already out. Is there a special election for him? What was his name again? Gallagher?
No, there's not. That seat will remain vacant all the way to November
because
he purposely withdrew at a time in which there could be no special election.
When he had plenty of time to do it.
He announced his intention to resign, but he waited to actually resign to make sure they couldn't fill
which shows the bad faith.
Exactly. Well, I've done several shows on this. I think that globalists like Paul Singer are intentionally trying to pick off Republican members of Congress, convince them to retire at a time that their seats cannot be filled in a special election. If we lose our House majority, then the first thing they will pass, I think, is legislation to try to bar Trump from running. The way I read that Supreme Court decision, again, I'm not a lawyer, but it looked to me like that the court virtually invited that in their decision. And then you have to wonder about the House majority, because I think the decision to renew the FISA program is the single most dangerous thing in terms of civil liberties I've seen since internet censorship. I mean, and the president took the right position. And then the speaker basically sold us out. I mean, he cast the tie-breaking vote. So, I mean, he's done as speaker, in my opinion. He'll fill out this term, but if the Republicans take the House, I doubt he will be speaker again. I was very disappointed that he didn't hold the line. And those Republicans who had the courage to say this is a broken program. The whole point of the FISA program And you saw the FBI director and all these guys going to how crucial it is to stop foreign terrorists and foreign nations. That's fine, but then they shouldn't have weaponized and used it on U.S. citizens, which they're doing, which they did not just once, but multiple times. Right.
And actually, one of the questions that we have for you is concerning Alex Jones. We know that this leaked footage came out.
Amazing, isn't it?
At the beginning of the week, where a CIA agent is very explicitly, and was it James O'Keefe? Was it?
Yeah, it
was
was
James O'Keefe.
No,
No, it wasn't.
No, it was another organization. It was a different organization, but I've looked at some of their other work. They appear to do very good work. So
undercover work, and they were able to discover this guy comes clean to the fact that the CIA targeted Jones, and they went out of his way to bankrupt him, to make sure that he didn't have resources, to get him tied up in lawfare, what was legally out of their hands, how they used other sources to go after him, how they convinced the families of the Columbine kids to go after Alex Jones. You're watching this entire thing, our very fortunate closeness to you. This is what we're watching happen to Americans.
So 2 Fridays ago, it's 11:30 at night. I'm laying in bed, looking at my phone, and Alex Jones calls. Hello. What's up? How you doing? I said, what's wrong with your voice? He said, I got to keep my voice low. I said, why? He said, I'm in Hawaii on vacation. I promised my wife I wouldn't use the phone unless it was an emergency. I said, well, is this emergency? He said, yeah, kind of. I said, okay, what's up? He says, you're not going to believe this fucking video. You're just not going to believe it. And he tells me what it's in it. And I said, wow. If it really shows everything you just told me, he says it's got a lot more. He says it's unbelievable. I said, so are you going to leave Hawaii and rush back to Austin to No, absolutely not. I'm going to be back in about a week. I want you to come on the show for 2 Fridays from now. I said, 2 Fridays from now. If I had this baby, I'd have it out tomorrow morning. He said, no, I can't do it. I'll be back soon. Gone. Alex Jones.
On brand.
Alex Jones, ladies and gentlemen.
That sounds very on brand.
Yeah.
But it
with the
was
raspy voice.
It was
so
very
funny.
horrifying to watch how openly they just and the entertainment that it's become for them, the targeting of Americans.
We bankrupt them. We destroy their reputations. Nothing screws people up by some social media thing that we plant. The guy says that. It was very chilling. Now, he does come across like he's bragging
a bit.
So
right.
you do wonder what percentage of this is bullshit. But when you look at his credentials, he is who he says he is. He was with the FBI. He is a CIA contractor. I think everything he said is essentially true. Yeah. Election night when Trump was elected, you've probably seen the footage. Jones and I are in Austin. We both have champagne. I'm smiling ear to ear like a Cheshire cat. Jones looks like he's about to die. I said, Alex, what's the matter? This is the greatest night ever. He said, no, you don't understand. Now it just begins. And of course, he was right. They bankrupted him. They tried to put me in prison over nothing, over bullshit. No, there was no Russian collusion. No, there was no WikiLeaks collaboration. And I had nothing to lie about. I had no motive to lie. It was all about pressuring me to testify against Donald Trump.
Right.
And anybody with half a brain knows it.
How you've been around long enough to know that this is a real concern for most people. I think that a lot more people are paying attention now. How concerned are you about the weaponization of these? Like, is there? I know we've talked about this before, but it continues to be an issue now. With the, we're confirmed we're going to have FISA for quite some time now. Prior to that, we had the Restrict Act last year that they were trying to pass with the ban on TikTok, which gave the Joe Biden ultimate power to decide who's a threat to national security.
Well, plus the Department of Homeland Security is already beginning. They're going to be censoring and canceling people and messaging.
Instagram.
Is there any way out of this? In reality, I think the biggest threat to Americans right now is the weaponization of these intelligence assets and how they're being weaponized against regular Americans for political gain.
I agree entirely. The only answer is you have to win a free, fair, honest election. You have to beat them, recognizing that even with their cheat, they're going into a bad economy with a failed president and a candidate who can't even stand up without falling down.
Yeah, if they're putting Joe Biden again to the test, knowing that even his own constituent or like American citizens wouldn't want him, like the Democrats would. I speak to my Democrat friends. They're like, no, he's old. Like, we don't want
they just
him.
want him
it's
to
like,
go. Yes.
Right. But if they're willing to do that, it's because they have a master plan of being able to secure the election.
To rig
That's
whatever.
just my opinion.
I totally agree with that. So, so when you saw Jill Biden on The View, and I'm not a regular viewer, I may add. But I saw the clip of her on The View, and somebody said, well, your husband's behind in all this. He is not. He's going to win. But what does she know that we don't know?
Yeah.
I mean, there is a certain
Level.
there's a certain sanguine comfort in these people.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs is unattractive, inarticulate, had no platform, wouldn't debate, did no campaign events, hid in her basement, but she got elected against a very dynamic and charismatic candidate, my friend, Carrie Lake. How could that happen? Well, we know how it happened.
Yeah.
The evidence of fraud there is rock solid. This isn't a rumor
Correct.
or a
Right.
theory. I mean, we proved that 59% of the voting tabulators in Maricopa County in the most Republican precincts
Yeah.
don't work on Election Day. And the reason they don't work is they've been purposely sent a paper ballot that is too long to fit into the tabulator. It was tested the night before with the proper size, but the next day they get ballots that are too long. It's willful. It is purposeful. But no judge is willing to stand up and say it. So, yeah, I worry that there's a comfort level on their part that they're going to just do exactly what I believe they did last time. And therefore, you got to clean the voter lists. There are a number of other things you can do. There's a much longer conversation, but there are a number of legal and technical things that need to be done that the Republican National Committee did not do over the last 3 years. And now we're playing catch-up ball. You've got new
Lara
people.
Trump.
You've got new people, you've got new leadership, and there's some pretty solid plans going forward. I mean, we didn't have poll watchers in many of these states.
No.
So stealing was easy because we didn't even have anybody there to watching to pay attention, and we had
Which
no
is something
lawyer.
that has changed significantly since 2020. A lot more people have become involved in
Yes.
that accountability that is
Yes.
being an American. Like, hey, the reality is these people work for you, and if they're not doing their job, then who's at fault for not watching them?
Yes, I agree.
And it really does come down to us. You know, we have their supervisor of election meeting is coming up. I'm sorry, the supervisor of election is coming. Supervisor of election is coming up, and the Miami-Dade Republicans have barely really endorsed any candidate. There's no real candidate in the race, and you're thinking after what we experienced in 2020, particularly in a county like Miami-Dade County, you'd think you'd see that effort of a candidate being pushed forward. Hey, that this is somebody who believes in election integrity, acknowledging what took place in 2020, and the fact that we don't have that is very worrisome for me. And I'm worried that you're a Florida guy, you know very well that not only are we not the gold standard, if anything, the birth of election fraud comes from Florida.
Well, and particularly Miami-Dade County, which has a long and rich tradition of voter fraud, second probably only to Broward County, where I live. So, yeah, it's a very, very legitimate concern. It's
it
a
leads me
real
to my
concern.
next question to you, because you were around for hanging Chad and you lived that change. Do you think that we will ever have free and fair elections as long as these machines continue to be a part of the election process?
I think we need to move to paper ballots. If France can count 38 million paper ballots in one day, we certainly should be able to.
Yeah.
It's the only way that you can secure an honest, fair election.
elections.
They told us the machines are not interconnected to the internet. That's a lie.
they are.
They told us that there's no way into them. There is. Look, I'm not a techie, but I think back when we had mechanical machines that weren't even, you didn't even have to plug them in, the elections were much safer. And then you have to be able to check the machine total by the paper totals to make sure they are the same. But does it make any difference if in the election day count, whether by machine or by paper ballot, the people running the board of elections are able to say, okay, well, the Republicans lost by 330,000 votes. So, boys, print up 340,000 paper ballots and bring them in tonight at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'll get them counted.
I mean, that's what,
Which is essentially
Yeah,
what
it's
happened.
Well, what
that's what's
happened?
Yes,
happening.
in
So,
multiple
right.
states. So, no, it's a very real concern. It's the number one concern. I'm convinced Trump is on a roll. I mean, what they're doing to him is only going to make him stronger. It's so transparent. People are seeing through it. The meaner they are to Trump, the more votes and more money he gets. Tell him he can't go to his son's high school graduation makes them look petty
So-
and mean and nasty. So I think he's going to be at peak strength.
Right.
The question still becomes, can we put enough safeguards in place in about 60 counties in about 6 states, or 8 states, to win this election? I think the answer is yes, but we're playing catch-up ball to do it.
What about the case today? Like, what is exactly going on with the Stormy Daniels case? And why is that still even a thing?
Well, it's a thing because you have a local district attorney who has decided to bring this case. I mean, the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney there, which is one of the most powerful and traditionally pretty independent U.S. Attorney's office, certainly no lovers of Donald Trump. They examined this extensively. They called people in front of the grand jury to testify against it. They elected not to bring this case. That's because it's a weak case. If anything, even if Trump did what he's accused of doing, which I'm not even sure he did, but even if he did, it's a civil business records case. To try to bump this up to a felony is because there are other efforts to get Trump to trial on more serious matters has failed, and they have to have a trial somewhere. Now, do they know that based on the fact that the judge gave a contribution to Biden's presidential campaign, based on the fact that the judge's daughter is a Democratic political fundraiser and operative whose clients have raised $93 million about this case, do they understand that Trump will ultimately, any conviction would be reversed on appeal? Yes, but they don't care. As long as he's convicted before the next election, they've achieved what they want to achieve because, and here's the most important part, because on election night, when they win in an upset, they will be able to say, you see, if he hadn't gotten convicted, that's what caused this late surge to Joe Biden. That's the whole point of putting him on trial. In the end, do they realize that he ultimately will probably be vindicated in all these cases? Yeah, if they even are brought, yes, they know that. They don't care. This is election interference.
It is legal election interference.
Roger, we have a cultural matter that we've been following now for the last year.
Well, wait. Before you get into a subject, because you missed a very important thing. Thoughts on VP. We saw that you were tweeting about
very important.
Yes.
Devin Nunes. I'm personally a Ben Carson fan. I would like for that to be the VP.
Okay.
Thoughts, concerns, potentials.
I mean, in all
I
honesty,
personally was disappointed about JFK. Very disappointed.
I think that is no longer a possibility.
No, we know that it no longer
is.
is.
So I guess here would be my view. First of all, in recent decades, it'd be very hard to find an election where the vice presidential candidate made a difference or where they mattered.
Right.
Because presidential elections are about the candidates for president. Could this be a different year? Yes, it could, because Kamala Harris is such a detriment to their ticket, assuming she stays where she is, and because Trump is 77, Biden's 81, and therefore it could make a minor difference. But as former President Nixon said to me, when you're choosing a candidate for vice president, don't look for somebody who can help you. Just find somebody who doesn't hurt you. That's pretty smart advice.
Very smart.
So what you want is, by that criteria, first and foremost, you need somebody who has the experience, the temperament, the judgment, the stature to actually be seen by the American people as a possible president. In the case that the worst happens, Trump gets hit by a bus, and this person has to become president. You have to be able to, the voters have to be able to look at that person and say, yes, that is credibly a president. After you've achieved that, then I think you need somebody who is sure-footed, somebody who has got enough political experience at the big league level, who's not going to go out and make mistakes, who's not going to misunderstand how the jackals and the fake news try to trick you into making mistakes, how the media will love to try to say, oh, well, vice presidential candidate X was on the other side of the country contradicting Donald Trump when he said Y. So they're going to always be trying to do that to you. You need somebody smart enough to know how to navigate that. So somebody who is sure-footed. Then I think you need to look at key constituencies to see if they make a difference. I would argue that the candidate who's getting African-American votes for the Trump ticket is Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah.
And the candidate who's getting
Tim Scott
and the
or
candidate
anyone
who's getting Hispanic voters for the ticket is Donald Trump.
Correct.
And you're already at historic levels among Hispanics.
Yep,
I mean,
absolutely.
40,
where we're polling,
36%,
I mean,
I think. Yeah.
wherever you are, you're
Something.
Yeah.
I mean, you're very close to 50%, which is unheard of. And then, so then, what is the only voter group in which we have not made much progress since 2016? That would be women. So now you look at several women candidates. I like Elise Stefanik.
I don't like her.
I particularly like Tulsi Gabbard. I know I take crap for it online. I don't really care because I always tell you what I really think. I mean, she is a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. She's a Iraq and Kuwait combat veteran. She's a former Democrat on the big issues of war in Ukraine and sealing the border and guns and abortion. She's solid. She's very skilled. I saw her take Kamala Harris in a debate and destroy
Yeah,
her.
she did.
She's sure-footed. Some in our own group, some of our own friends say, "Oh, she used to be a Democrat. You know, she was for Bernie Sanders." Which, if I had to choose between Bernie and Hillary, I probably would have been for Bernie
Yeah,
too.
I did. Yeah,
He
me
was
too.
the anti-war candidate. I think it'd be interesting. I think that she would potentially have some appeal to millennials, some appeal to women. Although she does not have children. So
I like Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
I just don't think she has the chops. I don't think she's ready. I mean,
She did work with Trump already as press
and
secretary,
again, that's
and
why
they did pretty well.
yes, but I think the president will always therefore view her as a staffer, unfortunately, and she has to build her own record. She will definitely have the opportunity to be president someday, but only 2 years into a governorship. It's the same. The other problem, I wouldn't say problem, it's the other issue I have with J.D. Vance. I like J.D. Vance a lot. I like
a lot
him a lot.
of rumors of that on Twitter. I've
But
seen.
again, 2 years in the Senate, being his entire public service record. Before that, he was a novelist. I just think that those credentials are a little.
But that was my
thin.
problem with
Do you
Vivek.
think-
That's what I kept saying. I'm like, why are you guys choosing Vivek? Because he's been around and you like what he has to say. He has literally no political background. You didn't even know who this guy was. I have nothing against him, by the way. I like him. I think he's brilliant. I think he's great. And I think he has a bright future. But nobody knew him until last year. And all of a sudden, we want to put him as VP. It didn't make any business sense to me, strategic sense.
I think,
you know?
in all honesty, I like him as well.
Yeah.
I had him on my show. I think he overplayed his hand. I mean, notice
does.
Trump has not ruled anybody else out. He's ruled one person out.
And it was him.
It was him.
Yeah.
That's because Trump was tired of being lobbied, I think. He was tired of the campaign.
Yeah.
See, Nixon once also said to me, you know what? You don't run for vice president. You position yourself.
Right.
You position yourself carefully. You make your availability known, but it's unseemly to be seen to be promoting yourself.
Right. And also, he has too much. I feel like it would be too competitive. Like, Vivek wants to be in the spotlight.
platform
This is-
is
he
MAGA.
wants to.
I think that's a very key point, though. This is a second banana role. This is a supporting role.
Right, exactly.
You need somebody
He
who's
wants
not
to be
going to
the
upstage the boss.
exactly.
Your job is to not upstage the boss.
Especially someone like Trump, who's like
Well, Trump
the
cannot be
character.
unstaged.
The Trump circus is
character.
a one ring
It's a one-
circuit.
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
one ring
yeah.
circuit.
He's the leader
there are
of
no
the
there are no
circles. Yeah.
co-stars.
Were you ever for the idea of a JFK potential VP?
I
pick?
wrote a.
I feel like I
I
remember
did.
you
I
writing
wrote,
a
I wrote a
piece on
Substack about it fairly early, only because I liked his position on health freedom, and I liked his position on the emerging war. I really hadn't studied. I was less aware. I knew that he was ardently pro-abortion. That was problematic, but. George Bush was pro-abortion when Donald Trump took him. When Ronald Reagan took him. It's the president's position that matters, not the vice president's. Since then, I've three things have disturbed me. One, this idea that if you don't agree with their views on climate change, you should be jailed. That seems a little bit much. And then secondarily, this running mate that he selected,
Oh my
she
God.
is so far out to the left, and she's got
So
Soros
bizarre.
connections.
Yeah.
So you have to assume that Robert Kennedy, who I think is very smart and who I respect, even though I disagree with him on many things, I think he did it for the money. What this tells me is his effort to get on the ballot through petition, which is very expensive and very difficult, very arcane, very labor intensive, is not going well. So he needs to throw more money at it. It was alleged, I'm sure you saw, that he had this flirtation with the Libertarian Party. He'd have been better off, frankly, to seek either the Libertarian or the Green Party nomination. Philosophically, he fits somewhere in the
what
middle.
I thought. I thought genuinely that he was going to run third party. I didn't think that he was going to.
Well, it would have gotten him on the ballot in 30 states automatically, and then he could fight his way onto the ballot in the other 20.
He's
It'd be
just
a lot
so
less
annoying because
expensive.
he's trying so hard to be like the moderate candidate that's against both crazy parties. And yesterday he had that tweet. I think he responded to it that he was like, well, Donald Trump calls the left like the far left. I'm like, because they are. Like, all these things that Trump is saying are not true. We're looking at it. We're seeing it ourselves,
I always thought like there was like in my head, I always thought that it would be a healing thing. I think looking at Tulsi, right? There's so much division going on in our country right now that the idea of Trump reaching across the aisle to a more moderate, not somebody that's hardcore right leaning.
Well, but, I think this is a key point, though. At the point that I mused about a Trump-Kennedy ticket, Kennedy was still running as a Democrat.
Yeah.
So what I assumed was they would screw him the way they screwed Bernie. They'd never let him, fairly compete. that he would create a pool of Democrats and independents who were upset about that and whose views were therefore based on the issues that he really pitched himself around, health freedom, the war, and so on, would be more likely to vote for Trump than they'd be to vote for Biden. Once he became an independent, I became pretty clear that he was not a viable alternative for vice president. And once he chose an extreme far left progressive as his running mate, that really told you who he really is.
Yeah,
who he
especially
really
with the
is.
climate stuff. The climate
absolutely.
stuff is very. I
And-
keep seeing more and more Republicans dive into the climate change stuff, even with organizations. I forgot the name right now, and I just it's concerning to me.
Well, but you have seen now, it is, I think, becoming abundantly clear that Kennedy's votes seem to be disproportionately coming from Biden. In the beginning, it did not appear that
Yeah.
way. But I think that's because the only outlets that would interview him were either conservative or alternative outlets. So conservatives and Republicans were getting a disproportionate amount of not coverage, but I would say amount of experience with him, watching him, and so on. But then when you start looking at the state-by-state polls, it becomes pretty clear that he's pulling disproportionately from Biden. The Democrats are freaked out. I mean, they're spending millions of dollars on lawyers and media to attack him,
Yeah.
lawyers to try to knock him off the ballot. So
Feels
they
really good on
clearly
TikTok.
see that
There's a threat there.
there's a threat there. Now, if you spend 5 minutes on Twitter, you will see a picture of me and RFK and General Flynn and one of my friends from Tennessee at a Truth About Cancer conference where I met him one time in my entire life. But if you read the internet, I'm the mastermind of his campaign. Me and my very close
That's what they
team.
say about you, that you're
Oh,
behind the
yes,
master.
even
No,
worse
I
than
haven't
it's-
that's
seen
the
that.
It's me and my bestie, Steve Bannon, which shows you how little they
They
know,
know.
right? So we are secretly running. We
my
recruited
goodness.
him. We urged him to run. We're managing his campaign. This is all nonsensical, of course. But there's one. I did meet him one time.
Yeah.
He was very nice. It wasn't a very
Yeah.
substantive conversation.
The
so-
only thing to me he has going on for himself is his name, obviously the Kennedy name. And what I've seen a lot where I think Trump could do better is that he's addressing and has always addressed the problem with the vaccines, which we can get into here on YouTube. So we're not going to discuss in depth, but there is a concern about safety. And
I'm not
so-
concerned.
Well, you're
I
not
mean,
concerned,
I
but
mean,
he is
you know,
getting
but-
voters. He is getting voters, like the anti-vax mom, like
That
these
felt
people.
disenfranchised that weren't gonna, the
Exactly.
way that I see it is the people
It's a
that,
small
those single
percentage.
issue voters that are voting for him just for that
Yeah.
issue weren't going to vote for Donald Trump anyways.
No, some would. Some would.
Well,
I would
I
say.
actually think actually when we're looking at looming World War III and a migrant invasion, that
Yeah, that
issue,
is at the
that issue
bottom.
in the
Right.
rear view mirror
Right.
doesn't seem nearly as powerful as it did.
It seems
2 years
very.
ago.
It just
There's a
seems
small,
like
Yeah.
something that the opposition is just holding on to
small
try.
group of people who are going to vote on that single issue. And
Yeah,
you
very,
know.
very small. I do agree with that. Yeah.
Roger, as I mentioned earlier, there's a story we've been following. It's a bit of a cultural shift that we're watching happening. You know, being on the internet, being activists. We've been doing this nowhere near as long as you have, but long enough to be able to see a trend that has
Patterns.
taken place over the last year and a half, where it seems like a lot of big conservative commentators. Today we had watched Lauren Chen. Fleckas was another one that had something similar. It seems like you mentioned earlier that the only demographic that Trump has not gained favor with
Is
is
women.
women.
Women, correct.
And it seems like we're watching a trend among right-wing conservative commentators, you know, entertaining the conversation about repealing the 19th Amendment, how feminism and women have ruined America. Women shouldn't be allowed to be in politics. Women shouldn't be allowed to vote. And we feel that there's a high probability that there's a bit of
Psyop.
an effort taking place to disenfranchise women like us that are very much involved. You know, when you see it too, you go to political events, and very often than not, women tend to outnumber men at these events.
Yeah, I must have been asleep because I haven't seen any of this. Firstly, I love women, just to begin, just to start from the beginning. And I've really not seen any. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it must be so subtle that I haven't seen it because I really haven't seen it.
It's something we've been documenting for the last year.
Yeah.
Slowly, it seems like it happened right after Roe v. Wade It's almost like this campaign gets launched, and what we're watching and just from tracking trends on the
But
internet
this is good because he's more on the politics side versus the cultural side. So
Mm-hmm.
if he's not seeing it that much, it's like I was telling an account the other day.
well, that's the concern.
Well, right. And I was telling somebody the other day what they say always, what is the GOP's like point at? They're going to keep pushing these streamers, this anti-women. And I said, this has nothing to do with Trump. This has nothing to do with the GOP. Somebody like Sneeko or Fleckas, they're just independent creators who, whether they share alternative views or concerning views or whatever it is, they're not controlled by the GOP or anyone else. So,
So they may well be outliers.
Do you think that there is a space for? Do you think that women are playing an important part in today's politics? You've been around long enough to watch it.
Well,
happen.
there are more women voters than there are men. So the answer is by definition.
by
yes.
definition, yes.
By definition, yes. Look, I would prefer a woman for the ticket. That's just I'm not speaking for Donald Trump. I'm not speaking for anybody but
As
myself.
VP ticket.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and there's several good women available. I've said nice things about Tulsi. That gets me attacked on the internet.
Yeah.
So be it. But I'm not endorsing anybody. I want to be very clear.
For now.
So even in that, and I said this last weekend, if you want somebody who is safe, you want somebody who's experienced, you want somebody who's tough, you want somebody who's battle tested, then take Devin Nunes. He was tested in the fire of the Russian collusion hoax.
That's right.
They tried to destroy him too. He was chairman of. Was in Congress for 20 years, but he was an outsider. He was a dairy farmer, not a lawyer or a banker or a millionaire before he went to Congress. He was there 20 years, so he has the experience. He's completely loyal to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's very good on his feet. He's low key. Nobody would ever say that Devin Nunes was flashy.
Right.
He's not flashy. If you want somebody safe, but with a little more energy than Ben Carson. Look, I love Dr. Carson.
Yeah, he's a very.
But he's a little sleepy. That's all I'm
Right.
saying.
Yeah,
I
it
mean, I don't think he gets you any new votes. He's a good guy.
It's just a safe choice.
Yes.
right?
It's a safe choice.
it's
But if
like
you want somebody safe,
Pence.
if you want somebody
Right.
safe who's also a fighter, and you
Right.
do, because it is the role of the vice president. Until Trump came along,
Right.
it was the vice president who did all the attacking, and the presidential candidate remained above that.
Right.
Trump broke the mold in that part. He attacks people from day one.
Luckily
right?
for
From day
us.
one.
Just his day. So he changed things entirely. But you do want somebody who's a fighter, and Devin Nunes is a fighter. I just throw that out there.
Well, we have to wrap up.
Yeah. Roger, tell our audience where it is that they can find you and what projects you're working on now.
So first of all, you want to go to stonezone.com. Stonezone.com is my main website. You can see my daily show, The Stone Zone, which is on Rumble at rumble.com/Roger Stone. You can also hear us every weekend from 4 to 6 Eastern Time on WABCRadio.com.
Nice.
77 WABC, one of the biggest, most powerful AM radio stations in the country. I'm on from 4 to 6 Eastern. But anywhere in the country, including Florida, you just have to go to WABCRadio.com. If you go to my website, The Stone Zone, it'll take you both to my daily program, which shows on Rumble, take you to the store where you can get all my books and your Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t-shirt and your other
I got it.
cool
You got it?
merch. You can also read my print stuff. I'm really picking up in the print journalism. John Brennan, the former CIA director, climbed out of his hole to attack Donald Trump the other day, and I had to remind people of this guy's record of law breaking and lying. So
Buffoonery.
I have a very hot piece up there now. So check out stonezone.com. Costs nothing to subscribe. It's absolutely free. We're also now, I think, at podcast. What is that again? Stonezone.podcast.com, I think. I think it's stonezone.podcast.com. I really do. Anyway, you can find it by going to.
We'll put it on the description.
We'll put it on the description
All right,
for our
sounds
audience.
good.
And
Roger,
of course on X.
yeah.
Yes,
Roger Stone.
now this is very important. There are many Roger Stones on X.
Right.
Many. There's only one real Roger Stone.
Real Roger
That's
Stone.
Roger J. Stone Jr. Roger J. Stone Jr. Yes, I am verified. Thank God I am, because there's 20 other Roger Stones operating. And what they do is they steal your graphics. As soon as you post something, they post the exact same mirror image.
Yeah.
So I was in a restaurant the other night. A guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, you." I said, "Yeah. Where's the crypto that I bought from you?" I said, "What are you talking about? I bought that crypto from you." I said, I'm not selling crypto.
I
What are
don't
you
do
What are you
crypto.
talking
Got
about?
dog beds.
What are you talking about? I said, "I bought it from you on Facebook." I said, "Well, that's easy. I'm not on Facebook." There's a Roger Stone who's been operating openly on Facebook.
Holy shit.
My lawyers have complained about this. I've had another woman come up to me and said, "You offered me a job and then you ghosted me." And I said, "Pardon me?" She said, "You offered me a job. I moved here to take a job and then you ghosted me." I said, "Where did this happen?" She said, "On Facebook." I said, "Well, I'm not on Facebook." So I think there are more than one Roger Stone over there
just
too.
make sure you
None
follow
of them
the
are me.
verified.
Make sure you
None,
follow
none
the
of them.
only
No,
real
none of the
Roger
Roger Stones on Facebook are me.
Stones?
None of them. There you go.
StoneZone.com/podcast. You
There you
heard it.
go.
Well,
Roger, thanks again
so
for coming out
much.
and hanging out with the
Thank
mostly
you.
peaceful Latinas and making time for us.
It was
Yes.
great. Thank you.
I appreciate every time that you come by. So we'll have you again
Yeah,
soon.
well, of course. And
Guys,
thank you guys
thanks
for
again.
being here again. And we will see you next time.